Well, thank you all for joining us for this session. The spring professional learning workshop is called Decarbonization Policies and Practices for Countries and Companies. And tonight we're going to be learning about this workshop, some of the learning objectives, the content you'll be hearing, and you'll be learning a little bit more from our experts as well. My name is Laurel Zaimashihi, and I lead the professional learning pre-college and K-12 and educator offerings at the Columbia Climate School. And today you'll see we're joined by the instructors of the workshop, Martin Dietrich Brauch and Laura Garcia Cancino. So over the next hour or so, but we might not need the whole hour, we're going to be talking about this professional learning workshop for the spring and answering any of the questions that you may have. So a quick introduction to the Climate School. Our mission is to develop and inspire knowledge-based solutions and educate future leaders for just and prosperous societies on a healthy planet. Our school is set up in a way that allows us to better connect, amplify, and advance new areas of climate inquiry, research, and impact across Columbia and beyond. The Climate School is really committed to offering transdisciplinary educational opportunities for climate leaders across diverse interests and backgrounds. So these professional learning programs are meant for working professionals and adult learners who want to develop new skills and explore new topics to further job-related interests without the long-term commitment of a degree program. The professional learning programs offer the same level of rigor and quality as our degree programs, and they're taught by Columbia faculty, researchers, and practitioners. These learning opportunities deliver high-caliber, online, or hybrid programs on a flexible schedule. These offerings help participants develop an understanding of climate and sustainability challenges through the expertise of Columbia researchers and give everyone a chance to network with their peers. All of these workshops are offered in 15 hours in length, and they're offered in English. So for this workshop series, it's going to be offered from Tuesday, April 15th through Tuesday, May 27th from 5:50 to 8 p.m. There might be a little bit of flexibility on that schedule. We might need to shift by a week due to graduation conflicts, but we will keep everyone informed through our mailing list, and we'll update our website if that does need to change. So you'll see across that 7-week period, we'll hit 15 hours in length, as I mentioned. This workshop will be offered hybrid. So for those of you that are joining not from the New York area, you can use Zoom. We'll be using Zoom meetings, so there's going to be a lot of interactivity and engaged discussions. For those that are in the New York City metropolitan area and would like to join in person, we're going to be meeting at the Forum building. This is at the corner of 125th and Broadway. We're also going to have online and in-person facilitators to ensure that we have engagement from everyone, no matter how you're participating in the workshop. Everything is recorded, and participants will have access to the recordings and materials for 1 year. So no need to worry about missing a session. If you have a conflict, you can always catch up asynchronously and reach out to us and the instructors of the workshop to schedule a one-on-one office hours if you would like to go over any of the material that you missed. There's no required readings or homework, but there may be suggested readings for certain sections. And while there might be some of these suggested readings or any tasks to complete, there is no official grading as part of this workshop, and therefore no transcripts from Columbia University. This opportunity is open enrollment, so there's no application. You will notice in the registration that we're going to ask some questions just to better understand your interest in the topic, your background, and where you currently work or what you're currently up to right now. But that's to get a sense of the cohort. Everyone at the completion of the workshop will receive a certificate of participation. This is a non-credit opportunity, and you're not a student of Columbia University through this participation. So for the decarbonization workshop this semester, the fee is $2,000. We do offer reduced rates for those that are current students, folks that have participated in workshops in the past, people working in government or nonprofit or NGO sectors, as well as alumni of Columbia University. And actually everyone today for tuning in will also receive a discount toward your fee. So thank you for joining us live. You'll have a 10% discount. You can just email me at learn@climate.columbia.edu to receive that discount code, and you can use it during registration. And I will put that email in the chat for you to pull as well. The deadline for registration is 1 week before the workshop begins. So the registration deadline is April 9th. And for today's workshop or today's info session, we are using Zoom webinar. So you're going to notice that the chat is disabled for participants, but the Q&A is open. And we really encourage you to ask as many questions as possible. This is your chance to meet and chat with Martin and Laura before the workshop begins. So at any point you have a question, feel free to rate or use the Q&A and we will ask them at the end. I think that is it for me. So I am going to hand it over to Martin and Laura to share more about the workshop.
Thank you so much, Laurel. Laurel is starting our slides. Great. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Once again, it's a pleasure to be with you here today and to lead this workshop later in the spring semester in New York. I led a similar workshop a couple of years ago in 2022, which was also a wonderful experience to interact with professionals from around the world who joined us there, and I'll be pleased to do a revisited and updated version of this workshop with my colleague Laura Garcia, who's also here. So next slide, please, Laurel. This is a very quick agenda, very quick presentation. We're not going to dig into the substance, obviously. Just wanted to offer a bit of a teaser of what we're planning for this workshop. I will quickly present some of the background and the starting point for our offering in this workshop and providing an overview of the workshop. And then Laura will continue presenting the learning objectives, the schedule and outline of the sessions, which Laurel just mentioned at a higher level now. Laura will tell you a little bit more about what each session will cover and the specific dates. Also, we will share a little bit about our center, the Columbia Center on Sustainable Investment here at Columbia University, where both Laura and I work, as well as our bios that Laura will tell you a little bit about, who we are, where we're coming from, what our expertise is, and what our professional and academic interests are. And we'll then turn to Q&A and hopefully have some interesting questions from you to take things forward. So next, please, Laurel. Our starting point are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, along with the Paris Agreement. And both the SDGs under the Agenda 2030 and the Paris Agreement were agreed to in 2015. These two international documents outline a global consensus on the interlinked needs to curb human-induced climate change and at the same time achieve sustainable development globally. Can move to the next one, please. And as I was saying, these two texts, both the Paris Agreement, the SDGs, flag the need for rapid decarbonization of our global economy and the need to scale up new technologies to meet the needs of a growing and modernizing population in order for us to be able to achieve the transitions that are necessary to achieve the 1.5 degree goal under the Paris Agreement, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals. So we'll dig a little more deeply in our workshop into the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, looking into what nationally determined contributions are, looking at the transparency obligations in the agreement, the climate finance commitments that countries have adopted, and looking at this international framework to be conducive to decarbonization globally. Next, please. This workshop is intended for any professionals who have an interest in policies or practices that enable climate change mitigation in various sectors. So you have here in the slide showcasing especially the various sectors where greenhouse gas emissions come from globally. Most of our focus will be on the global energy sector, precisely because it accounts for roughly three-fourths, of the global greenhouse gas emissions, as you can see here, We will also touch on a few other sectors, but mostly we will look into energy in transportation, in industry, in buildings, and several other subsectors, and how policies and practices can support both on the company side and the country side, drive the decarbonization goals that we need to achieve. And the goal for us is to offer a greater understanding of the implications of decarbonization of energy systems, economic development policies, and we'll focus on three sectors in particular: critical mineral value chains, heavy industry, and to a lesser extent, oil and gas. And Laura will give you a few more details on how we're going to do this split and organize the sessions for you. So we hope to help participants develop core competencies throughout the workshop, including the foundations of decarbonization policies, what the enabling technologies for decarbonization are, the opportunities and challenges to implement these policies and practices from the perspectives of both governments at national level and companies. And the idea is for this workshop to be accessible to learners from various backgrounds, to provide everyone with a basic understanding of the urgency to take climate action and the practical ways to get there. Next, please. So we will aim at deciphering what decarbonization means in practice. The perspective will be multidisciplinary. We will learn about the opportunities and challenges of decarbonization, embrace different perspectives from a global level to country level, and then to corporate or company level. And we will hope that this program will expose participants to various disciplines that are relevant and at play in forming the decarbonization agenda and the strategies. And this includes international law, economics, development and climate policy, technology, finance, and greenhouse gas accounting as well. And our hope is that learners from this workshop will walk away with ideas on the imperative of decarbonization, why we must do it, where we are in the process of decarbonizing our economy and our global energy system in particular, and the measures that are still necessary at all levels to help mitigate climate change. I'll pause here and pass the baton on to Laura, please.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Laurel. And thank you, everyone, for being here with us today. Can you go to the next slide, Laurel, please? Thank you. So our learning objectives and themes that we'll cover in this workshop are listed here. So we'll start with decarbonization pathways, and we are going to look into what does these mean in practice, what are the main agreements that the world has signed onto that form the decarbonization agenda globally. What does international organizations such as the IEA, the International Energy Agency, tell us about decarbonization and decarbonization pathways? What will be the cost of decarbonization in general, and what will be the benefits of accomplishing these decarbonization goals, if the world will be better off implementing these decarbonization goals and achieving these goals. We will also try to touch upon what are the sectors that are most difficult to decarbonize and why, and how does technology help in these goals and in decarbonizing these difficult to decarbonize sectors. And we will also try to learn together on how to make, measure, and monitor progress on decarbonization. So we will cover here what are the global trends in carbon pricing. Does the world have the right tools to measure progress in decarbonization? We will also touch upon the problems or the shortcomings of greenhouse gas accounting, and what are the disclosure requirements on climate, and if they help monitoring, decision-making, and enforcement of decarbonization goals. We will also learn about the global governance and international law, and how these international laws can be leveraged to make progress in decarbonization. This module or section will analyze why is the international legal framework relevant for the climate change agenda, and how will it help or not achieve these decarbonization goals. This will also try to answer if under the current form of these legal frameworks, it works as an enabler of decarbonization, or if it works more as a barrier, and what reforms would be necessary to ensure that global governance is effective in supporting these decarbonization goals. And we'll then continue to a second section of the workshop, in which we'll try to learn about these decarbonization goals and opportunities and barriers in practice. So we will analyze 3 practical case studies of decarbonization policies and practices. We will start with the example of one country, Paraguay, and then we will follow with 3 economic sectors. We will cover the critical minerals sector and value chains. We will cover heavy industry, and to a lesser extent, we will also touch upon the oil and gas sector. We will look at current practices, challenges, and opportunities when it comes to decarbonization in these 3 main sectors. And here is where we will want to hear the most from you, and use these case studies to inspire the conversation with you, and hear from your personal experiences, if you have any, or your personal interests, if you have any particular challenge in your space of work, in your professional career, in your own sector, and learn together about these challenges, opportunities, and best practices toward decarbonization. Next slide, please. So this is our schedule. As Laurel mentioned, this might shift a little bit and the dates might change, but I wanted to make sure to provide a little bit more of detail on what each session will cover, just to get your interest and take a peek into what we'll be covering in each session. So our first session will be more of an introductory session, and we'll talk generally about decarbonization and what decarbonization means for the world. We'll cover a bit of history on the UNFCCC, the Paris Agreement, the NDCs, SDGs, a little bit what Martin just showed us, but in greater detail. We'll also cover international organizations, particularly the International Energy Agency reports on net zero, and debate a little bit around net zero versus zero, and what does this mean, and what does each concept imply. We'll also, in this introductory session, cover a little bit about what the hard to abate sectors are, and discuss a little bit about the equity argument versus the economic argument. Then on our second session, which will be focused on measuring and monitoring progress towards decarbonization, we'll talk about carbon pricing, carbon accounting, disclosures. We'll touch upon various carbon pricing strategies, such as carbon tax, emission trading systems, companies' internal policies, and internal transition pathways, CBAM, and other different policies and practices that are used to measure and monitor progress towards decarbonization. We'll also cover the problems and shortcomings about carbon accounting, and what the role of definitions and mandatory disclosures play, and how they can be improved, and how are they working, and where are they not working. Then on our third session, we'll get to the global governance and international law and how it can be leveraged to make progress. So we'll talk a little bit about investment treaties, the investor-state dispute settlement system, the use of arbitration and by carbon-intensive companies, and we'll discuss generally how international legal frameworks can act as barriers of decarbonization goals, and how they can or could eventually support decarbonization. Then we'll, as I mentioned, start with the second part of the workshop, which is more of a decarbonization in practice overlook. So for our fourth session, we'll start with a case study from one particular government. It would be the government of Paraguay, and we'll share with you a study that CCSI conducted in Paraguay, and how this study integrated the results of 3 energy models with findings from our research, and how the recommendations of this study focus on reducing GHG emissions for Paraguay to meet its climate change commitments under the Paris Agreement. And while these recommendations and findings from the Paraguay case study are particular to its country, there are certain recommendations and concepts that can be useful for other contexts and other countries, even for the private sector. So it will be useful to cover the different sectors, how to decarbonize different sectors, so electricity, buildings, transport, and also include recommendations on finance and how to tackle the finance challenges that decarbonization poses. Then we'll move to our case study on critical mineral value chains and oil and gas. Here we'll talk about decarbonization of mineral value chains in general. So this will include decarbonization strategies and policies in the upstream segment of mineral value chains. And here we'll learn from specific case studies of copper and nickel value chains, but then we will go beyond extraction into mid and downstream segments of the mineral value chains, and we'll analyze what decarbonization means further down the value chain, including opportunities and challenges in developing countries, and how technology and technological innovation can help achieve these decarbonization goals in mineral value chains. We'll also touch upon repositioning mining companies as material companies and a little bit on mining contracts. And we'll include within this session our case study from the oil and gas sector and analyze the role that oil and gas companies could play in decarbonization, and also the role that they are actually playing and how they are contributing or not. That's a question to be answered during the workshop to decarbonization. Our final session during week 3 will be focused on the heavy industry. So we'll learn about what the heavy industry is, and we'll understand this is part of the hard to abate sectors and the sectors that are more difficult to decarbonize. We'll learn about the policy and technological decarbonization strategies to decarbonize these particular sector. We'll understand where we are and what we need to get to net zero in these particular industries. We'll cover like an overview of all of the heavy industries. So we'll cover a little bit of what decarbonization means in the aluminum sector, the cement sector, in the chemical sector, and we'll provide a deep dive on the steel sector and understand where are the decarbonization opportunities in the steel sector. What are the costs of decarbonizing the steel sector? Where do these incremental costs of decarbonizing the steel sector come from, and how to address them? And understand what are the private sector initiatives in these types of hard to abate sectors. And what companies are doing and what else can they do and where they can run the extra mile to achieve decarbonization in these sectors. And our final session will be more of a practical exercise. We will want to also hear from you and provide a guided exercise where you can apply all of the concepts that we have been sharing with you for the past 6 weeks, and together come to these exercises that can give you tools to implement these knowledge in your professions and in your particular areas of interest. Next slide, please. Okay, so let me briefly tell you a little bit more about ourselves. So Martin and I are part of the Columbia Center on Sustainable Investment. CCSI's mission is to develop and advance policies and practices that shape investment to contribute rather than undermine sustainable development. We work in a very wide range of topics that touch upon sustainable investment, including climate change, just energy transitions, mining governance, critical minerals, climate finance, among others. But these are the ones that are very relevant for our workshop. So Martin is a lead researcher at CCSI. He leads economic and legal research, training and advisory work with a focus on legal and policy frameworks and practices for sustainable investment to achieve climate change mitigation and adaptation goals. His work centers on climate change, just energy transitions, and fossil fuel phase out, also mining governance and critical minerals and investment law and policy. He has worked extensively with developing countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean, speaking English, French, Portuguese, and Spanish fluently. Prior to joining CCSI, he worked as an international law advisor at a global think tank, as in-house counsel at a media conglomerate, and as associate attorney at a boutique law firm. As a graduate student, he undertook a legal internship at the United Nations Climate Change, and he received a bachelor's in economic, bachelor's of law, and a specialization certificate in environmental law from the Federal University of Pelotas in Brazil. He also holds an LLM in international legal studies from NYU, and where he was an international law fellow. I'm Laura Garcia. I'm a senior legal researcher at CCSI, and my expertise encompasses the role of extractive industries and extractive industry supply chain in decarbonization pathways, also carbon accounting, GHG accounting frameworks and their shortcomings and how to tackle these shortcomings of GHG frameworks, and private sector initiatives and mechanisms for industrial decarbonization in hard-to-abate sectors. So that's us, and we'll gonna be sharing all of these expertise with you, hopefully, during this workshop in this spring. And we hope that this was interesting and it woke your interest for the workshop. We would be very excited to have you all and have these tough conversations. Decarbonization goals are very difficult to achieve. We have a very difficult scenario to come across, and we have a lot of challenges to meet decarbonization, but we need to have these tough conversations, and we need to continue to work towards achieving these decarbonization goals. So hopefully this workshop will give you some tools to bring into your own professions and your own careers to accomplish this and work towards these goals.
Thank you so much. That was, thank you. It was a great overview of the workshop, and it's a wonderful chance for folks just to get to know you both a little bit better. We do have a question in the Q&A, and feel free to keep them coming, folks. So the first question is, would shipping and aviation sectors not covered by the Paris Agreement be reviewed in the workshop?
Happy to tackle this very briefly. So Laura mentioned that in the introductory session, we would talk about decarbonization pathways, and I had also just shown the chart there, or the graph, the pie chart showing all the sectors. So in the context of global models for decarbonization, we will touch on shipping and aviation as part of the hard to abate sectors, and so we will mention them, but as you and discuss them in some detail is what I wanted to say. But you will have noticed also that as Laura walked you through the case studies, shipping and aviation are not one of the focused case studies that we're going to do. The hard to abate sectors that we're going to focus on in that third session will be more on the heavy industry rather than shipping and aviation. But at a more general level, I just want to say, not to create expectations, but also not to frustrate you. We're not going to ignore it, but it's not going to be a deep focus of the workshop either. So it's considered to some extent.
Perfect. And while we're talking about case studies, I had one question for you all. I'm curious why Paraguay was chosen as a site of focus. Is that an area where CCSI is doing a project or a lot of work, or do they have a particularly challenging landscape that is interesting to look at? Just curious.
Happy to take this on as well, also because Laura joined after we did that work. So I have a little bit more institutional memory on this one. The work in Paraguay was something that we at CCSI had the privilege to work on with the Ministry of Energy in Paraguay back in 2020, when the country was analyzing how to expand access to electricity, rethinking its future energy sources. Also, most of the power generation in Paraguay comes from hydropower, which is a renewable source. But as demand increases, as industry demands more energy, and also considering that energy does not equal electricity in terms of energy sources, energy also accounts for emissions for heat or for cooling in buildings and transportation. So Paraguay was struggling and wanting to examine ways to decarbonize those subsectors of energy as well. Considering that power generation was not the major concern. I think I don't want to exaggerate, but at least at the time of the study, 99% of electricity came from hydropower. So greenhouse gas emissions were not so much of a concern, but the other subsectors that I noted, industry, transportation, buildings, cooling, or heat for industry, and so on. And CCSI then had this opportunity to work with the government there and conduct this comprehensive study of energy decarbonization, not only electricity, but the entire country, the country's entire energy system. And that allowed us to not only develop our own expertise and grow and understand these issues even more, but also to support the government there in policymaking and in thinking of alternatives for decarbonization in the country. What I would also say about Paraguay is that it's interesting, as you have noticed, and my initial slide also flagged that our focus is on energy decarbonization. That is one of the key areas where we're not ignoring the other sectors, but because of the importance of the energy sector in greenhouse gas emissions, that is the key sector that is the focus of this workshop. But Paraguay is also an interesting study because it has most of its emissions actually come from other sectors: land use change, agriculture. I forget the exact balance now of emissions or the share of emissions per sector, but it's also an interesting country to look at to consider a bit of a different type of perspective in terms of decarbonization. It's not only energy, and the country where I am right now, Brazil, is similar in that respect. Decarbonization doesn't necessarily only relate to the energy system, and Paraguay as a case study for energy is useful, but it's also a good reminder that we shouldn't neglect other sectors that are also important in terms of the volume of greenhouse gas emissions.
Thanks, Martin. We have a participant that shares that they're very excited to be a part of this program and inspired, and they are tuning in from South Sudan. So thank you for joining us. Victor is asking, this is more of a logistical question, if he could take some of the classes in person, but not all of them. Absolutely. So when you register, you're going to notice that it's asking whether you're going to be in person or virtual. And that's because we have a cap on the number of in-person participants we can take in due to the size of the room. So we have a cap of about 20 people that can join in person. So I would go ahead and register that you're joining in person just to solidify that in-person spot. But we understand that things happen and sometimes commuting is challenging or you have conflicts. So joining virtually is absolutely fine. Just feel free to reach out to us ahead of time so we know and we're not waiting for you to join in person to start the class. Okay, welcoming any other questions for folks, but I have one more for you both. So given that we have this unique hybrid structure, it's going to be amazing, and hopefully just bringing in all this expertise from across the world is going to make the workshop so fantastic. And so we had discussed a few teaching pedagogies that we could use, some ways to bring interactivity in the workshop, and I was wondering if you would be interested in sharing some of those with the participants today.
Sure. Yeah, I'll take this to let Martin rest a little bit from the previous ones. Yeah, we are very interested in making this workshop a very interactive experience. We will have portion of each session to be some of like a lecture-like part that we will try to cover as many concepts as we can, so you can get all the information, get all the tools, but we also want to make this a very interactive process because we also acknowledge that you will bring a lot of personal knowledge and personal experiences to the workshop. So we do have certain amount of time for each session to conduct these interactive activities that involve using polls and videos and other tools. We are also excited about doing breakout rooms, implementing breakout rooms in person, but also with people joining online to foster discussions between people and then reporting back to the general group so we can have discussions live. But yeah, also like live quizzes and yeah, tools that will help us gather your thoughts and share them with the bigger group. And then I'll also go back to last session that we are planning. That last session is going to be fully a practical session. So it's going to be a practical exercise where everyone can put all of the tools and all of the concepts that we learned throughout the 6 first weeks into practice yeah, produce some. I don't wanna give away too much details because I really want to get you interested and sign up to the workshop, but it's going to be a very fun exercise where you can actually put all of these concepts into practice and bring your own personal experiences to it, and also take from the personal experiences from your classmates into hopefully what would be a very real life scenario that we will try to create for you guys.
Thanks, Laura. That sounds great. And we have another question. Do you think that decarbonization policies will keep their momentum despite the U.S. withdrawing from the Paris Agreement?
That's a great question, and I'll venture a first answer, and then Martin, if you want to compliment, please feel free. And to answer this question, I'm going to steal some words from our climate school dean. She said this course, and I thought this was a very intelligent and hopeful way to put this moment of history where we are at this point. And she described it as this being an event and not a trajectory. And I fully agree with her, and I think Martin does too, and we at CCSI do too. We do think that this is an event, an unfortunate event, but nonetheless just an event, and that the general trajectory of decarbonization and decarbonization goals are not going to be dramatically affected. There will be some, of course, effects on the U.S. administration policies and actions, and it will affect somehow our general goals. But in overall, I think decarbonization is not only happening, but it's needed, and it makes also sense from an economic point of view, not only for countries but also for companies. So I think that that's the lens that we want to also take this workshop with, and understand that even though we're in a very strange moment in history regarding the US administration, in general, decarbonization is going to happen, will continue to happen, and we need to learn the tools that will get us there and have the tough conversations to get us there.
If I can jump in here, I think Laura answered beautifully, and I would have said the same thing. It's an event, not a trajectory. Quoting our Dean Abramson here at the Climate School. Second thing that Laura said that I want to emphasize and second here, it makes economic sense to decarbonize. So that's not going to change either. And that's probably one of our first slides in the introductory session. It makes economic sense to decarbonize our energy systems. It will bring other opportunities. It will bring sustainable development co-benefits as well for the countries and companies that adopt it. And maybe the final thing that I wanted to add in my answer, which I don't know, maybe Laura did say it in slightly different words, but I would phrase it as in moments of adversity, it's also when new leadership emerges. If we're not going to see leadership from the federal administration at US level, we will see leadership coming from other countries or perhaps other entities within the US, from subnational entities, from state governments, from companies, and as well as outside the US, other actors and international organizations that will seek to occupy this space that is maybe left at a bit of a vacuum because of this unfortunate moment. But yeah, just to add a little bit to Laura's answer, thank you so much for the challenging question.
Thank you both for your answer in such a challenging time. I think that gives us hope. We have one more question. So will the workshop expand on carbon accounting methods commonly used? For example, how SQL is utilized to analyze carbon data?
Yeah, I mean, we are going to touch upon accounting methods, and they're mainly focused on their shortcomings. We will not, however, dive into how each accounting method works specifically and like into the granularity of each method. We will cover it more, and this is mainly just about time. I mean, we will. And this goes to also the question about shipping and aviation. We want to cover so much ground in these workshops. This is decarbonization is such a broad topic and has so many so many aspects and variables and things to cover. So we can't cover it all. So we won't go into each carbon accounting method, how it works, but we will cover generally the carbon accounting methods and where they where they work and where they have some problems and some shortcomings, and why some of these accounting methods are not really fulfilling their goals in terms of helping decarbonization get there faster, and why they might sometimes become a barrier to decarbonization instead of helping helping decarbonization goals.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us over the past 40 minutes or so. No, 50 minutes, however long we've been here. We haven't quite made it to an hour, so we'll give you a little bit of time back. If you have any questions about the workshop, please feel free to reach out. My personal email's on the slide. I also put my other email in the chat, learn at climate.columbia.edu. Everyone gets a 10% discount, so feel free to reach out and I can share that discount code. But we look forward to seeing you in the workshop. Thank you so much. And thank you to Martin and Laura for sharing about the workshop and your expertise.
Thank you, Laurel. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Laurel and Laura. Thank you, everyone. Hope to see many of you soon.